Okay, try to name 5 artists that have won a Grammy ever. Now, name somebody who designed that album cover. You probably can't answer that question, and I mean, no one can blame you. Even the biggest albums, it's really tough to find out who's the art director, the designer, the graphic artist, any of that stuff when it comes to these huge, critically acclaimed albums. Most people can't name them on their own or even find it. And the music industry was completely okay with that for a long time. And the album cover was always seen as part of the product, but never the point or the forward-facing piece of art that you see before you even hear a piece of music. But there was recently a shift with the 68th Grammy Awards this last February in 2026. We saw an award for the album cover. Not the album package, not the visual language of the album cover, just the cover. And this may sound like a pretty small detail to go over an award, but hopefully by the end of this video, you'll kind of get some of the perspective that I have on why this is such a big deal. This video took a little bit to research because there's actually a pretty deep history that goes into the album cover Grammy, and I had to do a bunch of research, but I'll try to give as much of it as I can. The Recording Academy, which run the Grammys, they announced in June 2025, last year, that they were announcing 2 new categories. And these categories were Best Traditional Country Album and Best Album Cover. This award encompasses the excellence across creativity, design, graphic art, illustration, and photography. And what's also important is this category is open to streaming and digital only albums. That distinction is pretty meaningful, and I'll come back to that in a little bit when I explain a little bit more of the history. And this is the thing that actually surprised me a little bit. This is not a new category. It's more of like a restored one from back in the day. The very first Grammys that were held in 1959 actually had Best Album Cover as a category, and it was awarded to Frank Sinatra, who was credited as the art director for his album Frank Sinatra Sings Only for the Lonely, or Frank Sinatra Sings for Only the Lonely, one of those. The album cover went on to become one of the most recognizable album covers. I've seen it before. I haven't listened to the album. I'm sure there's a couple people also out there that are in the same situation, but it's very melancholic. It's very theatrical. He's wearing clown makeup, and the Grammys saw that one as distinct from the playing field. I'll pop up some other album covers from 1958 so we can take a look at some of these. And they decided this deserves an award. In 1966, they actually then split this category up into graphic arts and then photography. So that now split the playing field on which albums were eligible. And then in 1974, they kind of lumped all this stuff in and called it Best Album Package. And this kind of signaled a shift in the thinking because this wasn't about the album cover anymore. It was about the total physical product. And then in 1994, it became Best Recording Package. And that's the name that stuck up until 2026, where we have Best Album Cover. So then I asked myself, like, what is the cause of this change that they decided to do this in 2025 to implement into this year, 2026? And I decided to all right, let's try to break this down a little bit. And I mean, the first thing that I thought of is that, well, music has completely changed. And, we don't see really packaging anymore. One of the things, side note, that surprised me is that I'm not involved in the K-pop genre in any way, but I think there's this huge emphasis on physical products, which is pretty sick. Yeah, I just find it interesting. I think there's a whole store in the American Dream Mall just dedicated to physical K-pop stuff. It's pretty cool how I think that is helping in the revival of physical media, which I love and I'm all for. But today, where streaming is king, there's barely any albums out there in the stores. I mean, if you go to some stores where they used to have aisles and aisles and aisles of album art or albums, they have nothing. I mean, they might have some of the biggest ones, you'll see a Taylor Swift, you'll see The Weeknd, you'll see other pop genre albums. But I mean, the discovery aspect of that has been lost for some time. And we have a few stores across the country that still hold true to the distinction. But I mean, unfortunately, we've seen a total, like, massive, like, span of losses in that physical record store space in the last, like, I mean, 10, 15 years, I'm sure. And I mean, at the time now, I mean, one could argue that album covers are more relevant than literally ever. They live on their phone screens, they're on their merch, they're kind of like made into memes in some cases. Some artists know that and they make their album cover memes. Young Thug's album was definitely memed super hard for obvious reasons, but now this helps distinguish that the album cover and the album package are not the same thing. And I want to stay on the naming history for a second. I touched on it a few seconds ago, but it tells like an interesting story when you start to like look at them next to each other. Best album cover, best album package, and the best recording package. Watch what happens to like the album slash like design word of it. It gets shifted down in the hierarchy until it's fully removed in 1994's version of this award until this year. Cover is very specific in that it implies one thing. When you say package or when you say recording package, it can be a plethora of things. It could be the things that are included inside of it. It could be the production value, which are all very important, very awesome. And if you are into vinyl albums, like they go crazy with some of those things. Like Bon Iver, for example, I know like does incredible stuff with his physical albums, at least has in the past. I don't know if currently, but people get really fun with vinyl records and even physical albums too. I mean, this is how I got my start into understanding graphic design and just loving this as a medium. Comes from back in the days. I used to just pirate a ton of albums on LimeWire, and then they wouldn't have the album covers or it'd be all screwed up. So then I'd go back, and if I couldn't find the actual album cover, and then like I was really picky too, and I would like need the highest res version. If I couldn't find those, I would make my own. And that is where I got my introduction to Photoshop. That's where I got my introduction into composition. It's where I got my introduction into typography, colors, and also understanding the history of the parental advisory sticker. It's very important to me as a person, and just speaking to a lot of people too, like it's very important to them. And I can imagine that just the album cover in general is the gateway to many, many, many designers over the course of history, and even just now going forward with the reintroduction of the category in the Grammys. And by the time we get to the word recording package, it becomes very detached from the whole like artwork, design, for like photography thing. It puts the music first, and then it wraps up like the immense complexity of like visuals and like the artwork into just like this one word at the very end. And I'm sure over the course of time, the art directors, graphic designers, photographers, all of the people that are involved in this like packaging, Grammy category, they still got the rewards and they still got all that stuff. That's pretty cool still. But I mean, just what it signals kind of just feels like, okay, you were involved in the afterthought of the album. And if you go on Apple Music, you open the music app and it doesn't just start playing songs automatically. It shows you album covers, album covers, album covers. And these are the first things that you see before you start. Like, I remember when I was younger and I would go to Best Buy or go to like FYE, I would just walk through and pick up albums based on their cover, then flip to the back, then do some research. Like, that was the thing that called out to you to pick up this physical media. It's the same thing when it comes to like other packaging design, when it comes to like the front of cereal boxes, and like you put a character that like a kid is going to be attracted to and like pick up, and the mom's going to get all pissed and like scream at the kid to put the cereal back. Like, these things are made to attract people to them. And as like this verbiage got changed over time, this has put less and less and less of an emphasis on the importance, like the actual importance of the album cover. And the interesting part is that like this wasn't something that art directors or graphic designers or even the recording artists like lobbied for. I think the Grammys just recognized that the people have proved the importance of the album cover. I think some of the best covers have their own independent life from the music. They separate off, and they have this whole world of their own. And just in general, they're worth paying attention to. They're not just like support material. And I know it's a lot of ands, but in the digital age, like streaming killed the package, like quote unquote the package in the name, but it never killed the album cover. I feel like, I mean, just from what we see here, I think this is just that part of the Grammy or the recording industry recognizing the actual like deeper importance in album covers. And over time, when we're like shifting the language over to like packaging, and then that's the actual only part that survived this whole entire physical to digital shift, I think that just means that all along there was an incorrect perspective when looking at this, when over time it's been devalued and devalued and devalued. So now I want to move into like talking about some of the nominees for the 2026 Album Cover Award. And first of all of them are interesting. I think they're all deserving to be nominated for Album Cover of the Year. And what I found too, doing more research, is that there's actually like a thread going through them that I'll talk about, at least 4 of the 5 that were nominated. And I think that also generates a little bit more of interesting conversation. For this part, I have to read them off my phone. I can't remember all the names, especially like when I don't know all of them. So the 5 nominees for the best album cover at the 68th Grammys were Chromacopia by Tyler, the Creator.
Debí tirar más fotos.
By Bad Bunny. The Crux by Joe. Glory by Perfume Genius. And Moisturizer by Wet Leg. I'll put all the album covers up here as I named them. I think they did a really good job picking ones that, I mean, mean something and were really impactful. And I haven't listened to all the albums. I've listened to definitely the Tyler, Creator one and the Bad Bunny one. But for the most part, just visually, they're all striking. They're all interesting. And they do something different from one another, I think, that really makes this like a competitive space. And I think just going forward in the future, it's going to be really interesting just seeing the discussion that's brought up around this. And just the discourse of like what album covers should have been nominated, and then seeing people talk more and more about the specific elements and how it is connected, but then also independent from the albums that they are representing. So when I was looking through all these albums, I did a little bit of research and I found something pretty interesting. So this is what I was mentioning earlier. 4 of the 5 albums that we have here, the art director, which is credited in the liner notes and the details, is the actual recording artists themselves. The only album I think where the artist was not the art director, or at least credited as the art director, was Perfume Genius's Glory. But other than that, I think this is saying that like artists are more, I mean, visually involved than almost ever. And I think that this is showing us that the line between like recording artists and visual artists is starting to blur a little bit when we get to these, or when we get to this level of artistry where you see artists that are involved, I mean, 360 in their creative process and in their creative offerings to the public. And I want to say something too. I think, I mean, it's only fitting that Tyler, the Creator, could win this category. I mean, at least for this first year. And I think it's just so showing of the Grammys that they are just kind of like trying to stay on top of things. I mean, Tyler, the Creator, is just so visually tuned, and I mean, we all know his history and all the different things that he's done and how involved he is with album covers, sketching. I grew up in the Odd Future era and like absolutely loved everything about everything that they did, not just him, but like everybody involved. There's, I mean, such a long history of Tyler, the Creator's relationship with visuals. And you could even tell just from his music videos himself, and then just hearing him talk about his involvement with this creative process. He's not just a recording artist. He is a creative, and I mean, a damn good one at that. Just a full 360 creative when it comes to every part of his album. Just the world building, so impressive that while, I mean, the Chromacopia album is, the cover is like good, but I think in this case, it's more about just like awarding him as an artist with this category, because I think like, I mean, people can argue Bad Bunny's album is like super, super, super important for everything. And you hear it everywhere and it's incredible. And just like the importance of that image, I think I've seen that album cover get memed so much. I've seen it get like re-photoshopped. I've seen people photoshop themselves across the album cover, and like people have explained it, given it more depth. And to me, as somebody that doesn't fully understand like the cultural relevances and like all of the references that go into making that album cover. I probably would have picked that if I was on the Grammys, but I mean, Tyler the Creator's a 10 out of 10 creative person ever. So like he absolutely deserves it. If we look at all 5 of these album covers and want to have a design conversation about them, they're not all using the same strategy. And what I believe is they're making different arguments for what an album cover is and stands for. And I mean, already out of the gate, this is such an interesting category, and bringing it into this year with the albums that they selected, they did such a good job just bringing that like diversity in the album covers. And when you think about, some of them are like deliberately odd, some are talking about the characters, some have like stronger cultural ties to the broader message of the album. It's really cool to see, and I'm just like super excited for like the next year and the next year and the next year. Now I want to talk about just some of the criteria that the Grammy board laid out for what is being considered when an album cover is either nominated or awarded for best album cover. Their stated criteria includes creativity, design, graphic art, illustration, and photography. That's a lot of ground covered in 5 words, and like this can get like really in depth if we wanted it to. And I might do like a part 2 where I talk about a little bit more, because this is a really exciting thing for artists and art directors out there in the world. But I'll try to break it down a little bit and just give my opinion on what these things mean. Creativity, I think this is like the broadest one. I'll start with here. What I think it means is that like, is it surprising? Is it doing something new? Is it pushing the idea of an album cover forward? And I mean, it's hard to understand like if it's grading this or not, because I mean, all of these things are obviously subjective, and every year there's always like an argument for like album of the year and like all the other categories. So this is no different, but creativity is a broad word. And I think this is like bringing a new idea into like the music genre, which kind of like blurs the line between what is like creativity and what is just high production value, because like creativity is completely detached from high production value. You'll see when people talk about like what's the best album that came out this year, they'll say, well, it has to be this one because it sold the most. But that's not necessarily true, because if the other person is also judging the artistic side of things, they're not even bringing that into account. So success in selling, in like capitalism wise, is not the same thing as like creative. And honestly, I think the more you go this way, you lose out on that creativity, which is where you see best recording package come from. And now design, I believe, is just the intentional layout, the composition, how the elements are placed, how everything is laid on top of the album. Does, you know, all of these things in culmination create an interesting and compelling album? Does it look good when it's like that little icon on your phone? Does it look good when it's big? You know, I think all that stuff plays into part here. And I think this is where like people could get like really nerdy and like nitpicky when it comes to like the design aspect of the album cover. And the next one's illustration. This one I think is the coolest inclusion, because I think the illustration is just like the most underappreciated aspect in design today, at least. And this is kind of like, you know, bringing illustration into the same conversation as like super high-end photography. So I think that like now having illustration, like there could be something that's like beautifully shot, touched up, everything like that, and it's now in competition with somebody doing like amazing hand-drawn lettering or just like visual symbols, graphic elements on an album cover. That's super sick, and I think it's like really leveling the playing field for all aspects of visual design. And for photography, I'm not like, I don't know too much about photography, but photography as design is pretty different from like photography as like documentation, because not only does it have to just work as an image, but it also has to work as a graphic element. So I think that brings another like level to the photography that becomes more subjective. And the last one I think is more of just like a catch-all. So like graphic art, I think this is just like used to kind of like blow out the category to include all different types of album covers, collage, like mixed media, all of that stuff. I think this is just the final kind of like cap that is for all the things that we could not catch in all these other words. This is bundled up into like graphic art. I think they covered all their bases. Some things way more broad than others, but I think they did an excellent job defining the criteria for this category. This is all just going to be a test for what I think makes album covers as important as they are. Can these things work independently? So now, does this album art work separately from the music? Does it make you ask questions? Does it compel you to listen to what the artist has to say? Does it just visually do something that no other album has done or is like thought to do? I mean, this makes me now think I can win a Grammy. I think I for sure can do one in the future. What does this Grammy do for like the field of graphic design and art direction? And I think it does a lot. And I think it may not also do a lot. I mean, there's different ways to look at it. The main one is that it gives individual artists recognition, which is always good. The people who made these album covers can now put Grammy nominated artist or Grammy award-winning designer. So now this is something that we can see as an addition in the graphic design field. And while I don't believe we all need to look at formal institutions to gain value, but I think the recognition does play a major part in developing further as just like somebody offering a service, because now you get to say a Grammy award-winning artist or Grammy nominated art director. And to close this out, I think what I would like to see happen is that I would really, really hope, I know this probably will not happen, is that the Grammys go back and the Recording Academy goes back and they retroactively award albums with this award. Because yes, I know they were part of like the recording package eras and things like that, but that's not the album cover. We know that it's like not specifically the album cover because now we know that you have taken this into account and decided to award for it. So, I mean, at least in the last 10 years, this will be fun. I'll put albums from the last 10 years that I believe could be a contender for album cover of the year if this was an award since 2016. I think that'd be really fun. Also, let me know what you think. I mean, pick a year. What do you think is an album that deserves album cover of the year? I think it'd be really fun to just see what other people say from like the 80s, the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and even the early 2020s. But yeah, it's pretty cool. Thank you.